Hi, welcome to another edition of the Opposing Points podcast. Today, I'd like to welcome Dennis Richmond Jr., journalist at Yonkers Rising with contributions to the New York Post and LoHUD, author of He Spoke at My School, and founder of the HBCU Initiative. Welcome to the podcast.
David, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, awesome to talk to you. So this all started because I read your recent article in the New York Post, and I went back and read a couple others. But just for people listening that maybe not be familiar with your work, can you talk a little bit about your background and what's motivated you to speak out on historically Black colleges and universities?
Sure. My name is Dennis. My name is Dennis Richmond Jr. I was born and raised in Yonkers, New York. I'm 26 years old, and I decided to, work with the advocacy part of HBCUs, historically Black institutions, because I noticed that there was a need in New York. So surprisingly, there are no HBCUs in the tri-state area. New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut do not have any. For New Yorkers, the closest we get would be either Delaware or DC, depending on how far you're willing to drive. So knowing that there was a need for students in my area to go to those institutions, I figured who better to start beating the drum than me.
Awesome. Awesome. And you talk about a lot about, growing up and kind of burying into your schoolwork and genealogy. You said you talked about being bullied for doing well in school. What are some of the important takeaways that you have when you look back at moments in your life? How do you think it shaped you, and how do you use those moments to help people in similar situations that you grew up in?
David, I love that question. Okay. When I look back at those moments, it's always interesting because, that's the younger me.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just interesting, for a better choice of words, because I've gotten through it. I'm not there anymore, but it's interesting. What I would tell someone who's in my shoes or, who's going through that is that it gets better. But luckily, it's not the same today. I was in school during a time when it was a lot different in New York. And I'm sure, your high school experience was probably, the same as far as it was a lot different. We see high school students that are going through different things today than there were before. When I was in school, there was this phrase and people would say snitches get stitches, and that was a big thing. And trying to pass as hardcore and what have you was a big thing when I was in school. I don't see that in high schools a lot anymore. There's a lot more freedom in schools for people to be themselves, and conversations about mental health and being open in your true self. So to your point, what I tell people is that it gets better, and to always be who you are, always be who you are. I was a huge bookworm in school. I'm a huge bookworm now. The only difference is that people respect me for it now because it's something to be respected. I just happened to be in an environment at the time where people didn't, favor what I was doing, right? Because they were involved in other things.
It's also the era of the nerd now, I feel like,
I agree. It's cool to be smart and to be, on the political up and up. That's the thing now, to know.
Yeah. So you work a lot with kids, right? And you teach them about HBCUs. I don't really know too much about them other than they were really a lot in the news when Trump was president. Can you talk to me a little bit about the history of them, why you believe they serve an important function?
Sure. Once upon a time in our beautiful country, you had people who couldn't go to all schools, right? Mm-hmm. So you had Black Americans and they couldn't go to any institution that they wanted to go to. You had some institutions that opened their doors for Black Americans, but majority did not. Right. So with that, after the Civil War, you see an influx of these schools being created. So you had Black people coming out of slavery and they wanted three things. They wanted a place to worship, they wanted a place to live, and they wanted a place to go to school. So that's what you saw during Reconstruction. So though you had a few HBCUs that were created between 1853 and 1863, it was after the civil right, it was after the Emancipation Proclamation for about a hot 10 to 25 years when you saw an extreme rise of schools. And I think that's amazing because you don't have social media in 1863. But it's just that people in Texas wanted the same things that people in Louisiana wanted. People in South Carolina wanted the same things that people in Georgia wanted. They wanted schools. So in 1869, you see Claflin University being created. You see Morehouse College being created in 1867. You see Howard University in 1867. So that's how that went, if that answers your question.
It does. It does. And to my knowledge, there were some like there were some free Blacks at the time. Where were they educated, or did they seek an education like prior to these HBCUs forming?
Right. So prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, you had two HBCUs. You had Cheney and you had Lincoln. One was founded in the 1830s. The other was founded in the 1850s. But prior to that, you had schools such as Amherst that were accepting Black Americans, and you had a few others up and down the country. So there were ways for Blacks to go to college to be educated, but majority of them were not.
Okay.
I come from families on my father's side of the family that were antebellum free Blacks, or quasi-free Blacks, as Professor Patricia Koger would say. So yeah, you know that they did exist.
Yeah, you've posted some really cool pictures on your Twitter of I was like, damn, like that's crazy. So I guess the next question would be, what kind of unique function do you think they still serve now, when all schools kind of accept everybody? Like, do they still have the same level of importance of your view? It just seems like a political football that's kind of thrown around between the parties, just looking at it without knowing too much about it. But
Sure. I would say that they still serve a huge purpose, and I'd say that for three reasons. The first reason is because of legacy. So whether you're talking about an HBCU, whether you're talking about an Ivy League institution, whether you're talking about a community college, families love to big up their schools to their children. So you'll have people who say, well, you know, your mother went to Harvard and I went to Yale, so you have to choose one of those schools. You know, it's a natural thing that people do. Or, you know, I went to Howard and, you know, my mother went to Howard, so, you know, you have to look at Howard. It's what people do. So you have them for that reason. So one, legacy. People want to continue a tradition that they are familiar with. That's one. Two, you'll always have people, no matter what political party, who feel as if you'll need HBCUs, because there are a lot of people in this country who feel as if there are a different set of rules when teaching Black Americans certain things. So HBCUs don't have a curriculum that's different than other institutions where it's like, okay, you're going to get a different education if you come here compared to this school.
Right.
But it's the history behind the school and it's the culture within the school. For an example, HBCUs have something called the Divine Nine. They have fraternities and sororities that you'll see at other schools, but that dominate on HBCU campuses. And that's something that you get there. That's a cultural thing that you'll get and you'll feel. You have different foods that you'll experience on an HBCU campus. You have different bands playing different songs and homecoming experiences. So other than a legacy, the second thing that I'll say to your point is culture. It's the cultural thing there. I went to school, my HBCU, Claflin University in Orangeburg, South Carolina, had, I would argue, at least, and I know this is wrong, but at least maybe 30%, and I'm sure that number now is probably up to 50, but at least 30% of the students who were there when I was there, if not 40 then, were students who were not Black American. They were international students, they were white students, they were Asian students, they were Indian students. There was an HBCU, and there are a few HBCUs at the moment who a lot of people are upset about because they have an enrollment that has more non-Black American students than Black American students. You have some HBCUs that actually have more white students than Black students.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you'll have people who say, well, it's an HBCU. And they say, well, yeah, I believe Bluefield is like that, where they have something maybe like 80 or 90% white students, and it's an HBCU. And there was an article that someone wrote, and I believe the title was "The Whitest HBCU." And it's like, wow. So legacy, culture. And the third reason is because they're still there. You know, you have over 100 institutions. So I don't think that, you know, because a couple of people and a couple of parties are like, hey, we don't need these, we're just going to shut down 100 schools across the country. I don't think that's what you do.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you for that education. It wasn't something I was familiar with. So I want to get a little bit into some of the articles you write. I think some of the nuances there are interesting because people kind of take a side and stay there, and you can't think something else, or you're something else. So you write that you're a proud supporter of Black Lives Matter, BLM, and you point out, I think it was a Pew study, right, that around 80% of Black adults strongly support or somewhat support the movement. One thing about that interested me was that there was such a huge political party divide, meaning like only 19% of Republicans support it, 85% of Democrats. Why do you think that there's such a stark divide among the parties?
I love that question. I would say there's two reasons for that. The first would be, I think that anything in our day and age that has to do with resistance to policing or resistance to law or what might look like that is automatically deemed leftist, Democrat, like that's over there. Like Republican, conservative, we don't touch that. That's not what we do. Like that's a them thing. And with that, I think that that's why that is, because when you have people saying defund the police, or when you have people saying something like, you know, we need different policing or better policing, you have some people who say, yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, let's do that. And then you'll have other people who say, no, it's perfectly fine the way it is. I love, you know, the police in my neighborhood. It's my, what are you talking about? And often, not always, it's not the exception per se, but some might argue it's the rule. If you had to pick a party, it's usually the Democrats who say, let's do this and do that and do that and change. And it's usually the Republicans who say, no, let's leave it alone. So why do I think that is? I think it's that way based on the people who are in the party, you know, and that's what my most recent article gets at. Like, you know, conservatives in this country, though you have many Democrats who have conservative values, they haven't considered themselves on paper conservative. So I would say it's because of who's in what party. That would be my answer to that, because of who's in what party.
Interesting. I've had a few other Black conservatives or people that identify conservatives very against the BLM movement. You also self-identify as more conservative. Obviously, conservatism doesn't have a like a monopoly on what ideas are good, but that's the general thing that we're seeing in these polls too. What do you think has led you to a different belief system around the BLM movement than some of these other folks?
Other folks meaning who? Republicans or Democrats?
Oh, like some of the Black conservatives that typically they don't.
The fact that I can understand I get it. You know what I mean? I understand it. There's emotion there. And while I'm not saying, you know, let's go burn down a Macy's and let's go loot a Target, you know, I definitely understand that there are some people who have very strong emotions about things that go down in this country, to the point where you might want to get together and say, I feel like this needs to change, to the point where I'm going to rally up with my friends and make some signs and stop traffic on a freeway, you know, or to the point where some people might want to, you know, go to the Capitol and say, look, this is our country and this is how we feel, you know?
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with like the race-based nature of the call for police reform? Because I think, I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Daniel Shaver or Tony Timpa, but Daniel Shaver is probably the most extreme example of where we saw. I'm not sure if the fellow was white or not, but he was gunned down in a hotel hallway,
Mm-hmm.
and it like it's not really talked about, and I think when when BLM first came out with this anti-police brutality movement, people were really kind of on board with it. And then once it took the racial turn, I think that's where support kind of left it. What do you think about that?
I think that is interesting. You have a group of people in this country who say that there's only one race, and that's the human race. And then you have, I would argue, a larger group of people who say that you have different races. And when race gets in the equation with things, there's a lot of gray area.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of feelings, and things change. You can say there was a man who was chasing a woman down the street, and people have a preconceived notion of what the man looked like and what the woman looked like. And especially if you say which street it was and what city it was. And, if I say there was a man chasing a woman down the street in Chicago, and it was on the south side of Chicago, and people say, oh, well, it's the south side of Chicago, of course she's been chased. But if you say, no, she's being chased down a street on, Rodeo Drive, and it's like, Rodeo Drive, well, she must have been rich, and he must have been chasing a rich woman. And, so it's funny how things are when race is thrown in the equation.
Right. Yeah. If you tell me someone's chasing down someone in Rodeo Drive, or like it's kind of demographic, like the chances of them both being white are higher there versus the south side of Chicago. So I think there's so many.
And notice I didn't even mention race. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like naturally we just think.
That's what comes to your mind. It's like the majority of people that live in XYZ part of the whatever are this and that. So that's usually, people ingest a lot of factors.
And all I said was chasing her down the street. He and then the story goes, and yes, he was chasing her down the street in the south side because she dropped her credit card and he wanted to give it back to her. And it's like,
or wanted her number. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, people automatically assume like something about the statement, right? That's interesting. It's like it's some sort of bias. I'm not really too familiar with it, but we plug in things into our brain based on kind of our life experience or what we've read.
Of course.
Right.
And we're not wrong for that. And I think that people want us to be, but we're not wrong for judging our future experiences based on our past experiences. That makes us who we are. So if you grew up in extreme poverty and you work extremely hard because your motto is, I don't want to go back to that, no one can fault you for that. So someone who didn't grow up in extreme poverty, who might not have the same work ethic as you, can't fault you for that because they don't know what you've come from and what you're trying to not go back to.
Right. I mean, bias is evolution. Like, that's a survival thing. And we can recognize it and work on it. But there's been kind of like a deprogramming, you shouldn't have kind of narrative. And it's really just based on like the environment you grow up in. And like some people like feel things that they have to work on deprogramming themselves. Like, hey, I've been in this experience. Like, I met a white person who treated me poorly. I met a black person, Asian person that treated me poorly. Therefore, they're all like this. And then you move to another area, you're like, oh, they're not. Like, and people need those experiences. You can't just shout at them that they're evil because of them. Right. So one of the other interesting things you write about is that you support BLM and the police.
Yes.
So someone might ask, the organization of BLM and the movement for Black Lives, which kind of supports BLM and some other organizations, they're pretty explicit in their advocacy for for abolition of the police, or in the case of the movement for Black Lives, nobody should be in prison that's under 23 or over 65. And by the way, there should be no prisons. So like, what's your thought process behind that nuance and being so unique in terms of supporting police when the platforms of the other organizations you support don't necessarily want them to exist? Yeah.
Sure. My thought process is that for lunch, I can eat a salad, and then for dinner, I can have steak. I don't necessarily have to always choose one or always choose the other. There are bits and pieces of each that I like. So me saying that I support Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that I support every single facet of the organization. And me saying that I support the police doesn't mean that I support every single police officer and every single thing that they do. And I think that's where people make the misconception. You know, often when we vote for a city council person, or when we vote for a legislator or a senator or a president, it's not because we like everything about the person. And often when they get into office, majority of people who voted for them don't like every single piece of legislation that they put out or every single move that they do. But we feel enough about them that we can say, yeah, well, yeah, I voted for that person. Unless, of course, they do enough to make us say, yeah, well, I did, but, no. So to your point, how do I balance that nuance? Because I can, because I'm human, and because I see parts in this that I like and parts in that I like. But by supporting both, that doesn't mean, at least for me personally, when I say it, that I support every single thing that they do and stand for.
Right.
Hence why I support both, because there are some things that Black Lives Matter stands for that I'm not with.
Right. Yeah.
Or some things that, certain police officers, keywords, certain police officers do that I'm not with. And it's important to note too, to be respectful of all of law enforcement out there, that police are not a monolith. So you don't just have police, period, and that's it. You have police officers who are men. You have police officers who are women. You have police officers who are non-binary. You have police officers who are trans. You have police officers who are Black, who are white, who are Asian, who are Indian. Some are gay, some are straight, some are lesbian. So when we say police, it's like we assume that they're this one group of people, and that's not true too. You know what I mean? So it's also interesting because
I was going to say, you kind of break multiple monoliths at once, or supposed monoliths, right? Like, whereas people say, if you're Black and you don't vote Democrat,
exactly.
But then also you kind of find nuance within like the questions that I'm bringing up, right? So you can also identify a conservative belief. So that's another monolith you kind of break within conservatism.
Yeah, like people like, police and support police. And it's like, okay, well, police officers aren't all over the age of 50. Some officers on the force are 24. Some are 26. Some are in their 20s and Black. Some are in their 30s and Italian. Some are in their 40s and Asian.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's like we have to really think about this. So you have some officers who voted for Trump. You have some who voted for Biden. You have some officers who didn't vote at all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like police and we back officers and we back that. Okay, but are you backing all of them?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you backing all of them? Are you backing the 29-year-old Puerto Rican police officer who believes wholeheartedly in Black Lives Matter, even though she's a police officer too? It's like, you know what I mean? So it's, you're backing the 26-year-old Mexican police officer whose parents came to this country and he believes that, immigration is a good thing and, that it's not a bad thing and that there shouldn't be a wall. And there are all of these nuances. So when people say, it's police, they automatically assume all police think the same.
Right. I think, I left New York City over the summer with everything going on. New York is
it's quite a place.
It's also a majority minority, if I'm not mistaken, police force. And, we had Yeah, I remember a video where someone was yelling at a black cop that they were a race traitor. And I don't think the individual yelling at them was even black. Like, it's like racism towards conservative police officers. I don't even know his police. I don't even know his political affiliation. Like, towards a police officer, like
Right.
that's just like become normalized. Like, and there's almost like this. I don't even know what to call it. It's almost like what is it? Gentle racism, like where I don't know if that would be the phrase, where you're still racist to that person because their ideas, even though they're black, don't align with your ideas of what, I'm kind of getting at here.
I know exactly what you're saying. I just learned this week that I always thought if you were a member of a community, you had a right to talk about that community because it's yours.
Of course.
That's how I felt. So I felt like if you're a police officer, you can talk about police because you're a police officer. You know what I mean? Like you can do it better than anybody because it's you. If you're black, you talk about black people. If you're white, you talk about white people. So what you do, it's yours. I didn't know that gay people can be homophobic. That blew my mind when I found that out today, this week. But somebody told me that, and they were like, "Well, gay people can be homophobic," and I said, "How?" That threw me.
I'll buy it. Really I don't get it.
Because you can still act out and say things against the community that's negative and be a part of the community and do things and say things to negatively impact the community. So again, I thought if you were part of a community, you could talk about that community, but I see not everyone feels the same. To your point, you know what I mean? So as to why
you're gay and conservative, they kind of get kicked out too. Is that what you're?
Yeah. As to why you can, be of a certain race and then go up to someone in the same race who's a police officer and say, "I don't like you and you're this, and why would you pick that career?" And it's like, what is that?
Yeah, we're at a point where I think people are looking at race before ideas, or that rate like that they need to go like hand in hand. Generally,
careers before ideas sometimes.
Yeah, right. Generally that's projected on I don't even know if it's limited to anything, like white women who vote Republican are voting against their own interests because Republicans don't like abortion, or gay people who vote Republican are voting against their own interests, or black people that vote Republican are voting against their own interests. I've never gone and spoken to a conservative that I disagreed with and faced like bad reactions, but sometimes if you tell someone who identifies in the more liberal spectrum, not always, but sometimes, you get that, like, I don't even want to talk to you because you can't think this way. And it's more of a stark, like less conversation, more emotional reaction.
Yeah. I think for one, it definitely depends on the person, know, and, two, people are strong in their beliefs. People are really strong in their beliefs. It's the same way that, you go up to some people who are extremely strong in their Christian faith and say, there's other religions out there too. And it's like, yeah, but this is the one. It's this one. It's like, yeah, but he says it's that one. And it's like, yeah, but no, so it gets very interesting.
Very dicey. Very dicey.
Oh yeah.
You quoted Charisse in your New York Post article. I found and that was called, for anyone interested in reading that, why more Black Americans are calling themselves conservatives. It was a great article, I thought. And so what she says in there is that she kind of believes the Democratic Party has always been anti-Black and racist towards Black Americans. However, if we look at today, the Democratic Party overwhelmingly supports BLM. The Republican Party does not. You can argue that, I think Frederick Douglass may have been aligned with I think Republicanism itself was founded as an anti-slavery movement. But what do you kind of make of that that conversational point, which is that Democrats now are the ones supporting BLM?
Well, when we look at that, we have to, understand, first off, how the change happened, because often people always say, oh, well, Black people, in this country are Republican, like by nature, like that was always what it was, and whatever. You don't have a change of parties or a switch really until the 1920s. So it was during the 1920s when it started. It was the 1920s when it started. It got really kicked up in the 30s and 40s under FDR when he came out with his New Deal programs. And you had a lot of Black Americans who felt like they were going to get jobs under the New Deal. You had a lot of Black families who started to name their children after FDR, my grandfather included. And it took a head in the 60s when Lyndon B. Johnson signed the civil rights legislation. And afterwards, that's when a lot of Black Americans who were in the Republican Party really made a switch to the Democratic Party, because they said, wait a minute, here's someone who is signing this legislation, so maybe we should be a part of this party, because obviously they're trying to right some wrongs. So there's that. So to your point, again, the conversation is just interesting. But so what Sharice said, it depends on how you look at it. There are things that historically were one way that aren't always the same way today. So,
right.
It depends on how you look at it.
Right.
Because if you look at the history of it, yes, she's 1,000% right. However, the switch that was made, it took decades to do.
Right. I think when am I mistaken in thinking that when LGB signed that legislation, the House was controlled by Republicans?
When he signed it, was it control? I'm not sure. I think it was controlled by Democrats. I could be wrong.
I think it was controlled by Republicans. There's that documentary that was put out by what's his name, Larry Elder, about that, and the whole thing is focused on the myth of the party switching, because I think about like George Wallace, right? You're very like virulent racist. He ran as a Democrat. I think that was in the 50s or 60s. So he was Barry Goldwater, who opposed who was a Republican nominee. I forget what year. I think was it in the 70s or 60s?
It was. Yep.
Yeah, he was maligned because he was against the Civil Rights Act, a couple of sections of it for just like certain reasons, but he actually was worked on integration efforts in other states. It was just more of like a federal government power thing. So I'm not so sure about the narrative that the Democrats were the sole ones supporting. This is something that I keep coming back to you on that.
No, of course. And there are sources out there that say that Lyndon B. Johnson wasn't, the end all do all and the pro Black person out there. Like there's sources that say he was, has a huge racist history too. And it's interesting how that never makes it out. It's like he signed this legislation and he's great and that's it. But there's a story, I don't know how true it is, but there's a story that, he treated his chauffeur, who was, a Black man, like garbage. You know what I mean? And called him racial slurs and asked him one day, would you rather be called a racial slur or would you rather be called your name? And he said, I'd rather be called my name. And he basically told him, well, in order for your people to get ahead, you have to know how to just be quiet and accept whatever you're told. So just act like a piece of furniture. And then he signs this legislation and it sort of like mitigates everything he's ever done. So people are very complex.
Yeah, I have to look back into the legislation. I think it was like the 88th or 89th Congress. I was trying to look it up on my phone at the same time. But either way, I think it passed like a long bipartisan line. Like certainly we were more bipartisan then than we were now. So there's more.
Well, it's funny too, because people, I would even argue and say in our lifetime, maybe 20, 25 years ago, whether you were Democrat or Republican, they could work together. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like people found a way to say, all right, let's get it done. But now it's sort of like, I can't look at you. I can't do this. I can't do that. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing about LBJ is a lot of Black conservatives argue that his Great Society program was extremely harmful to the Black community. It actually did affect other
Mm-hmm.
communities as well, as far as like out of wedlock birth, and stuff like that. The welfare programs, reverberated throughout every kind of racial segment. So one has to wonder, like, did they know that that would happen? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we're the only thing that's done bipartisan these days is make sure that people our age can't afford a house. like like
And they were strapped with student loan debt. No.
right. I mean, I was talking about this with my friends today. You could do everything right at our age. I'm like a couple of, you're 26, I'm turning 29, so not much too different. You could do
Right.
everything right. You can save, you could live at home, and you could save whatever money you make per year. And let's say you've got $100,000, $200,000, which puts you in like the top 5% of millennials. Let's say you can still not comfortably afford a home without going broke. I think they call that like
That's right.
house broke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you look into like what's caused that, and it's all, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Let's lower interest rates so everyone can own a home. Let's spend more money than we have. And we're like, the Chipotle burrito, that hits home. That's personal to us. That price has gone up. That price has gone up. I still got friends in New York City. The price of that burrito went up apparently 8% since last week.
Have you
From
seen
my friend.
gas?
Gas I've seen too. It's,
Gas is ridiculous.
yeah, it's absurd, and they just print money, and there's a good economist, Peter Schiff, that he uses a great analogy with some of these like spending programs, because essentially when they give out the stimulus checks, they literally, the bureaucracy that it had to go through to even hand out the checks cost more than the checks. So what he likes to say is, like, it's like taking a blood transfusion from one arm to your other arm and then spilling half of it on. Um, so I mean, like, we're in this situation because of bipartisanship, really, because they both, whether they spent it on social programs or endless wars, um, which is like something that Donald Trump spoke to. I think he outspent Obama in a single term, though. Don't quote me on that, but I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
didn't cut spending. He cut taxes, and he didn't cut spending. Joe Biden didn't is trying to raise taxes, and he's not cutting spending. No one has cut spending, and so we're in this
Do you
situation.
think? I know this is a crazy question, and I'm assuming that I know your answer. But do you think our country will ever be out of debt or no?
Mm. Uh, I think there's a couple of things that could happen. We do have the benefit of being the world reserve currency, but I mean, I think if they raise interest rates, that would be really hard to pay back. They keep, like, kicking the can down the road. So I mean, we've essentially already defaulted. Like, we print the money to pay the debt. Like, that's, if you loan me $100 and I go and print $100, I'm paying you back with less worth, is like with more worth. So that's a default by technicality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that the inflation problem is going to get much worse here, and it scares me as far as the social fabric, which I feel has been torn apart, um, in the last, I don't know. I reference Thomas Sowell's books a lot. He's one of my favorite authors, and he talks about a couple of blackouts that happened in New York City. And I think there was a 10 to 20 year difference. And in the earlier blackout, everyone stuck
What, the
together.
blackout of 77?
Yeah, there were two of them though. I just don't remember the second one.
Mm-hmm.
But they were a little bit apart. And like when one happened, everyone was like together as a community. There wasn't very much crime. And then the next one happens, and mayhem. Like people, he talks about how people, even in like the low income housing, they would leave their doors open if one person had a TV so that anyone could come in. Like, we don't have really that trust. And I just feel like the social fabrics, like whether it's the Kardashians or whatever is going on, people are just kind of all out for themselves than people used to say, oh, neighbor needs help, like help the neighbor. I think this is one thing that the Amish get right. If something burns down, you've got like 50 Amish people, like a cartoon, like building it back up the next day, right? Like I think we've lost that camaraderie as some of these, I don't know what's causing it. Maybe it's social media or whatever.
No, I agree. Fun fact about the blackout of 77, you had a host of people during that blackout who, when you spoke about, people who were looting and stuff, who ran into music stores and what have you. And that really was one of the early reasons that you have so much hip hop and rap music in the 1980s, because so many people were able to get equipment who couldn't afford it before, thanks to that blackout. And then it was like that next year, bam, all these people now. So I think that's amazing how life works. It's like it's a blackout, and then bam, now all these rappers and DJs. So I think
Did anyone notable come out of that?
Say it again.
Did anyone notable come out of that?
I'm sure, but they don't want to go down as the one who came out during the looting from last year. So it's like, looting? No, I've had this. So it's like,
yeah, that's like they should put that in that book in defense of looting that came out.
right. So look, man, maybe based on looting that happened like last year, it's gonna be a new genre of music to come out in 2 years. So David, we're just not giving enough time,
Yeah, like today, I think it was like AOC and Lori Lightfoot, like we're both really like, don't believe that some of this stuff is happening. They're like, oh, there's not really much data. Or Lori Lightfoot's like, oh, these places don't have enough security. Like they shouldn't expect people to just come in and take everything off their shelves. Like,
yeah,
what? I'm reading the book San Francisco right now. I'm like 30 pages into that.
Is it good so far?
Yeah, I actually really like it. And I'm hoping to interview one of the people interviewed in the book. At some point. But yeah, it just talks about the uniqueness of San Francisco and why it fails more than like maybe other cities at all. Like it has a worse problem with homeless than New York City or LA, and they put more money into it. I think it was like 3 or 4 times as much. But I can't really go much further because I haven't gotten that far in the book, but so far I would recommend reading it. I'm of course reading it with a lens for interviewing questions, just like I read with when I read your articles as well. So I think that's a really interesting point, not to divert too much from that.
Of course.
But I've also spoken to quite a few Black conservatives that they come from a household where they strictly vote Democrat, because that's kind of what they were used to. But then they say that, like, if you really ask some of these folks or their family members, like what they believe, their values tend to actually be conservative. Do you think that disconnect traces back to what we were talking about? Like why they see someone Democrat and that's their vote, rather than looking more along the policy lines that they might actually agree with more?
I think it's a stigma. You know what I mean? I really think it's a stigma. People don't want to necessarily say I'm Republican. So people would rather say, I'm a conservative Democrat. Because it's like, if you say Republican, it's like, to a lot of people, it's scary to say that.
Yeah. Well, they're still voting Democrat, even though some of their values more aligned with
exactly. Yeah, because they don't want to make the switch, even though they're on the fence. But again, it's like, yeah, but if I'm that, then I'd be perceived as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So I'm not going to be that.
What do you think would push them?
Honestly, it would have to take another major circumstance, like with the civil rights legislation that happened in the 60s, to make a massive wave of people want to move. And I don't know what that would be, what that would be? It would be whatever president, like Trump coming in 2024 saying, I thought about it long and hard, very long. I thought about it very long. And we are going to cancel all student loan debt to all students, because that's what we're going to do in the greatest country in the world. That would do it, David. That would do it. We'll sign it up tomorrow.
That would just make him a Democrat then, which he's honestly, if like some of the things he's done, like they are leftist and authoritarian. Like I went to a GOP event because Glenn Youngkin got elected here in Virginia, and like I was like, no, I didn't vote for him. He's just as authoritarian as Biden. He just likes different things. Like I think they're the same to me. Like he's a big spender. He likes, for the most part, he likes government control. I mean, of people. I mean, there's a little bit of difference, but not so much. I mean, at the end of the day, people are, bombing places without declarations of war. They're all doing this. They're spying. He passed the First Step Act. Like that was good. And that's the argument that people that have made the switch make for him, which is that he's actually, even though he's like says reprehensible things, he's done the First Step Act. He did the funding for HBCUs and
plan.
Yeah, that never got done.
But the fact that
they never took the call. I think that was that with Ice Cube or Ice T. I always forget the ices. Vanilla Ice, it definitely wasn't. But
no, we know it wasn't him, right? Ice Cube.
Yeah, so they never called, like they never spoke to Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, and I think Kanye liked him. Lil
Wayne was there.
Yeah, Lil Wayne loved him. Kodak
surprised
Black,
so many people.
Kodak Black was like, bring him back. So there is some serious love, and I've seen, maybe it's just because of social media has been hyped up, but there is more of it at these rallies, like where people are surfacing that he's less monolithic than, like, I think he got more of the black vote than Mitt Romney, if I'm not mistaken. So what do you kind of view that as? Is like what has Biden done for Black America better than Trump or the Republican Party in recent memory? I mean, his bill was the one that incarcerated so many people, and
to that, I would say not so much what he's done, but remember, it's party loyalty to
right.
A lot of people. That's what it is. It's party loyalty. It's like, look, he ran under the Democratic ticket.
Yeah, I'm
a Democrat. Gotta go for him. It's party loyalty.
Yeah, I always laugh at that. I don't know if you've seen the video where they go around the park and they read out quotes and they're like, was this Joe Biden or Trump? And they all guess Trump when it's something like, that sounds super racist. And it's like almost always Joe Biden.
I need to see that. I definitely need to see that.
Yeah, because like, oh, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. I think Chelsea Handler said that, like, oh, I need to remind 50 Cent that he's black. And it's like, what? Like, and that's the attitude that comes around, and people say that's not racist. And I'm just like, how is that not racist? Like, I don't go around saying things like that because, like, everyone thinks their own way. It's like, I don't expect someone to think a certain way because of the way they look. It's just kind of ridiculous. And that's okay today. Like, if you're a Democrat only, though. Yeah. And the other question I had was also in one of those articles about your disappointment in Kamala and Biden and Harris. And I think, as you can tell, I'm probably not a fan of the two-party system that we have. So do you think that they have delivered on any of their promises that they've kind of made towards the Black community and other minority communities? Do you think that people oversell Trump on his accomplishments? And do you have buyer's remorse?
It's funny you said it was one, and then you hit me with three.
They're very connected. So we could start with one. Do you think that they have delivered?
Right, I got them. I got them.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I would love to see a lot more, but often what a lot of politicians do is they'll get in office and then the thing will be, well, look, I can't make legislation for just one race and one group of people. You know what I mean? Like that, I have to do it for everybody. So, yes and no. To your other question, you asked about Trump, correct?
Did he oversell his accomplishments? Meaning like what he did with opportunity zones. I'm not familiar if the Biden White
House. I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
People have their data. Data doesn't lie. People have their data. Whether people choose to acknowledge it or not is something, but people have their data. So the only way to know that is to fact check.
Right. The question is, do you trust the fact checkers?
The question is, who's doing the fact checking? Remember, that was a big thing. Poll watchers, who was watching the polls and who was there, who wasn't there. Whose grandmother was there. How do we know it was the grandmother? Take a DNA test. It was a whole to do.
Yeah, there's a couple of things with fact checkers. I remember there was one that was like with Andrew Cuomo saying like this was this and this, he didn't do it, and I'm like, no, like he did this, and they have to always go back and like fix it. Like they did the same thing with the Wuhan lab. They went back and originally they called Tom Cotton a conspiracy theorist. They went back, they adjusted it. With the Rittenhouse trial, whether someone agreed with the verdict or not, they continued to say that he crossed state lines, that his mom drove him. Even just the basic facts around the circumstances continued to not be reported. Like you can look at the video where he was, whether he was there, we know that, right? But whether he was guilty or not, we know those basic facts, and yet the media kind of continues to report like, oh, she drove him, he crossed the state lines, and we know those things didn't happen.
The media is biased.
Mm-hmm.
Different media programs are biased,
right?
And that's how media works.
I know, and it's
people
super...
turn on.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say it's super frustrating to have conversations because I personally don't watch anything. Like I don't watch Fox News, I don't watch MSNBC. Sometimes I watch MSNBC for like some of the crazy crap that Joy Reid says, but that's about it. Like I don't really watch.
You don't tune into Fox every so often and check out Fox and Friends?
No. If you're on it,
you
I'll
need
check
to.
It.
They had a say it again.
If you're on it, I'll check it out.
They had a huge segment on my article. I have to send it to you.
I did see I don't remember the host's name. They were talking about it. I did see that. I think you posted a clip.
So they did too. They did one. I wrote the article, the recent one, and they had Sharice and Felicia on. And then prior to that, my article about the vice president.
I've definitely seen one clip of your stuff.
Yeah, they did a huge one on that. So yeah, you gotta tune in to Fox and Friends.
All right. Well, you gotta let me. Isn't that on at like 6 a.m.?
I haven't know that. How do you know if you don't watch it, David? No.
I'm pretty sure it's on. No, I just know it's on early. So you'll have to send me the clip after. Dude, I don't wake up before like 8:39. Like that's just
you gotta DVR it.
Yeah, I don't own cable, so I'm putting that. You send me. You let me know when you're on, or send me the clip, and I will happily watch it. And click the like.
You need this clip? I say yes. We have to send this to David.
Yes.
I say who? I said David.
make sure, publicist, go get into
right.
it. Yeah. So there's little moments there, but I think most of these hosts, they play their role. Like I could watch Tucker Carlson. I might agree with some stuff he says, but does he actually believe what he's saying, or is he just kind of playing his part? Like you remember that show Crossfire, where like Jon Stewart, there's a clip where he just destroys both of them because it's just. And Matt Taibbi wrote a book about this, where it's like, it's deliberately, like a weak liberal or whatever, and they deliberately go after each other. He talks about how Trump is like a heel, which is the bad guy in wrestling that people, except he actually did participate in WWE. And so it's like, I really just don't pay much attention to that. Generally I like to follow like independent journalists on Twitter or people like you. It's like who actually have something to say that's not like
Thank you.
parroting, you know what I mean? So I enjoy that. It's generally the people that are not given those headline shows that are interesting to listen to. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Anyway, the other thing. Oh, do you have buyer's remorse? Did I miss that one?
No, because of party loyalty.
Okay. Well, you identify as more as a conservative, but you're still a Democrat. Is that the party?
Do I? No.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Subject to change.
I mean, how do I come off?
I honestly don't know. I think you sound pretty moderate to me.
I don't either.
How do I come off?
I really don't. I mean, I'm a registered Democrat. I am. Say it again.
I said, how do I come off? That's the question.
Independent, strong independent. But yeah, I'm a registered Democrat. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm conservative on some things and leftist liberal on the other. But like,
yeah. I mean, no one's. I used to actually be a libertarian, and then I grew up.
Not I grew up. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I still identify largely with. I identify with a lot of libertarian tendencies, but I think more so conservative libertarian at this point. With like, because we don't have the society to live in that you can be a libertarian. You know, it's just libertarians like open borders, like, you know, you can't really do that. I used to believe in that stuff, but there's too many incentives. There's too many, I think, threats where, you know, in an ideal world, yeah, people can go and as they please between countries. Right. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on is the missing number of teens. I think it's super important that you talk about that. I think the number, if I'm not mistaken, is that though Black women or minorities make up, I think it's 13%, they represent about 30% of missing cases. Like an
is absolutely crazy,
insane. And it's funny, like the speaking of sex trafficking and all whatnot, like the Ghislaine Maxwell trial tracker on Twitter, which is like the only thing where I'm finding updates on this case, removed from Twitter. Not sure why. But you know, in Democratic media, they kind of lament about how we only talk about white people missing. This came at the forefront with Gabby Petito. And that I look at that, I think Joy Reid was a big person on this. I look at that, I'm like, you run this show. Like, why aren't you talking about it? Like, are you saying that, like, what she's saying is that I, as a white person, or someone else as a Chinese person, does not care that a child is missing, presumably in danger, because she is not covering it. Like, what do you kind of make of what they do? Like, should they be looking in the mirror more?
I mean, I don't watch her show. I don't watch TV.
Just in general, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people need to focus on this because it's serious,
right?
You know, and no matter whether it's a white child that's missing or a Black child that's missing, we need to find these missing children. You know, sometimes they go reported as missing because they run away from home for whatever reason, and they're reported for that. And others, they are seriously gone and will not be returning home ever. And we need to find out what's going on. And you're right, there's some really dark things going on that need to be brought to light.
And I think your opinion is what majority of people think, right? They don't say, oh, that kid that's missing is Black. I don't care about them being found. Like, you're like, they're playing, they're like making their own kind of narrative, in my opinion.
I think it hits home more for others, more so than me, because I'm not a parent.
Right.
I've never had a child before. You know, and they say when people have children that it's different when you talk to them about children because they know what it's like.
Right.
You know, you'll see that often, you know, especially before COVID. You know, no matter what race, you'll see people with babies and stuff, and you know, mothers will come up to them, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, look, he's so cute. Oh, look at her. Oh, she's adorable. Because it's a thing, like, you know what I mean? Like you're a parent, you get it, you understand. And
Right.
oh, what are you spending the day with dad today? Oh, okay, it's a daughter dad day, you know, like it's daddy daughter day. Like people get it, you know. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter what color they are. If they're missing, let's
Yeah.
find them.
It's almost like it's being put, like the moral judgment is not about the people who actually decide what gets covered, but on the audience, because it's not covered, almost doesn't care, because they should be catering to the audience, right? What the audience wants to see. Because I mean, I think across Fox News and MSNBC, none of these places are actually news stations. Like at this point, it's all opinion, right? But yeah, it's an important topic that I wanted to make sure that I covered with you. Is there anything else that you think is important that you'd like to cover or talk about?
No, but what is important that I talk about is the fact that I show you gratitude and say thank you for having me, because I'm humbled that you did and that you reached out and that you followed me on social media.
Thank you, man.
No, I mean that. Thank you. You know,
Likewise.
there's a lot of people out there who want follows from David, and the fact that I have one is pretty cool. So thank you.
Thank you. So where can people get engaged with you and get involved? Do you do any mentorship like opportunities?
Well, at this point, my largest platform is looking to be Twitter, which is awesome because, you know, it's the thing now that everybody's tweeting. So my Twitter is New York Stacks, NEWYORK STAKZ. And as far as mentorship and what have you, I do, but right now you can stay up to date with me with my thoughts, my articles, and perhaps things that I'll be retweeting and quote tweeting from David. So yes.
Thank you. I'm just getting started, so I appreciate that. More so than followers, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to interesting people like yourself, and generally the way to do that is to have followers. So that's really the only purpose of Twitter for me. So I appreciate you being really humble and easy to reach out to now that you've kind of hit the big time and publishing articles in the New York Post and stuff. But yeah, I will put I put your Twitter on at the beginning and at the end of the video in the Chiron, so people should give you a follow. I really appreciate your time. It means a lot. Thank you for joining this episode of the Opposing Points podcast.
Thank you, David. I'm glad to be here.